best definition I've ever heard in my life of sales is a transference of enthusiasm.
Mm,
You
I
have,
like it.
you believe in, you learn your products, you know it well, you know how to apply it, and then you just get out there. And if you expose 10,000 people to that, you'll probably end up with 1,000 opportunities, of which you'll probably win 500.
Hmm.
If you expose 100 people to it, you might end up with 50 opportunities, of which you might win 10 or 20. There's a place to sell and there's a place not to sell. And you had better front load 90% of that relationship build with that prospect, not around trying to sell him anything, but strictly around trying to get to know him.
Hmm.
What are his hot buttons? What are his likes? What's important to him? What does he do on weekends? How did he get his business started? How many kids does he have? Where did he come up with the name of that business? How did he get funded for it? You really want to find out all about that person. I'm talking probably for months before you ever say something like, hey, I'd love to stop by and talk to you about my product. That's probably going to sound more like, hey, I'd love to stop by and get the nickel tour one day if
Yeah.
you're open to that.
Yep.
But you really, and the art of networking is the art of building relationships. It's not the art of selling people stuff. Because if you build a good relationship, Jeffrey Gitomer always says, all things being equal, people will buy from who they like.
Hmm.
And all things being unequal, people will still try to buy from whom they like.
Hmm.
That's the essence to me of networking right there. You got to build a good relationship, and then down the road, the opportunities will come to do business. Dinner table was interesting. So my dad was a New York City cop. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, 5 children. My parents had what they call Irish triplets. So I was the third of three boys born within 3 years. So it explains a lot about my nature, my competitive nature. So it was a lot of elbows at the table. We learned, both being a New Yorker and having a bunch of siblings at that table, you learn to be fast and aggressive.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So you obviously have a deep entrepreneurial spirit. Did you get that growing up? Did you start companies or start your own, money making uh, schemes when you were smaller, or did that not hit you until a little bit later in life?
I probably have my mother to thank for a lot of that because she's a hardcore Irish Catholic, stay-at-home mom, coupon queen. So my dad, in addition to being a cop, worked several other jobs to keep her at home.
Hmm.
He drove taxis, worked ticket gate at the Yonkers Raceway nights and stuff. So she would do anything she could to squeeze a penny. And
Hmm.
she had us all working from an early age. So I had a paper out by the time I was single digits,
Hmm.
and then I was working on a farm by the time I was 14 to pay my way for $1,000 a year Catholic boys' school, which I had no desire to go to, but my mom informed me I was going and I was paying for it.
Uh-huh.
And the day that I turned 16, I mean, every gallon of gas in a car or insurance or a piece of clothing I had to work for and pay for. So yes, from an early age, you could call it entrepreneurial. I would just call it survival.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
mom did a really good job, and they had enough that they could have covered me for a lot of those items, but that was just her style. She chose not to, and a lot of that went into making me who I became in life.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that outlook. So you went to school. What happened after you got out of school? Did you start your first company then, or was it not until a little later that you started to really get involved in?
That's a great question. Really, what I ended up doing was I had good grades in high school. I went into college. I did one semester and I dropped out immediately. Later, I've studied, many businessmen, and Steve Jobs is a someone I really look up to a lot. But
Hmm.
it's pretty fascinating. Obviously, I'm no Steve Jobs, but in that area, I certainly paralleled Steve because I sat there, in class, and I just thought, what is this doing for my life? Where is this
Hmm.
taking me? So I dropped out after one semester, and to a lot of people, I would have looked lost, but I really wasn't. So by the time I was, 18 and had finished with high school, I was a black belt in karate. I was captain of two softball teams. I was always a bit of a natural leader. Didn't even realize it per se.
Hmm.
It's just how it went. I had a large group of guys, and we lived large. I was always planning crazy trips and events, and ski trips and road trips and stuff. So I did that for years, really enjoyed myself while I was trying to figure out what I liked. And then at some point, I went back selectively to school and took things that made sense to me. So I did some testing when I was probably about 19, and it came back and said I had a very logical mind,
Hmm.
so I should be a computer programmer. So I took computer programming courses at night at Western Connecticut State University. I went some special training at IBM for about 6 months, and I became a coder at an early age. And it took me only a couple of years to figure out that I hated being stuck in an office with a yardstick, debugging programs for days, trying to find out where I put a zero instead of an O. Basic, Pascal, Fortran, RPG2. This probably doesn't make any sense to people these days, but actually hard coding programs back in the day. So I did that, and then I went to the School of Visual Arts in Greenwich Village, New York, and I took advertising and marketing, and I
Hmm.
really loved that. But after doing that for a few years, I kind of concluded that most of the people involved in that industry were pretty flaky.
Hmm.
And I knew, as much as at the time I had a rock band and long hair and I was a wild man, I knew one day I'd be a balding, middle-aged, married part with a bunch of kids. And I was a little bit, vexed by the idea of this kind of flaky lifestyle where most of the teachers I had at the School of Visual Arts had back then resumes with job experience, as long as my arm.
Hmm.
And that's just not how the world was back then. But in the world of creatives, it was. So for that reason, I turned my back on that. And then I began, I just to try it. I was still kept my job as a computer programmer to keep the bills paid. But then I went to work at night after work at a place called Crazy Eddie's on the East Coast selling electronics.
Okay.
Anyone who's familiar with Crazy Eddie's probably just chuckled. They had some of the hokiest commercials known to man. But it was a good entree for me, and I figured out pretty quickly that I really did enjoy interacting with people. And then in just a turn of events, I was 25 years old. I had no real ties. I knew that I hated programming and I was bored of it. Found out about a company that was starting up in Detroit, Michigan, and it was a machine tool company. So it was very expensive machines that had computers running them.
Hmm.
And I applied for a job there, kind of forced myself on them, and started at that company. So I moved to Detroit, Michigan, bachelor, just myself, Jeep, a couple of Honda Goldwings, and started doing that. I spent the first couple of years in service because of my technical background, working on installations, fixing machines, ordering parts. So in my world, that's served me well for many, many years because I got to learn this equipment that I've made a living out of from the inside out. And then I ended up in Detroit, Michigan.
That's fantastic. So that's where you started getting your touches into the manufacturing industry, correct?
Yeah, that was my first entree.
Yeah, yeah. What types of things, fascinated you about that? Like, were there certain things that you guys were making that was like, that's really cool. I want to be able to make that, or what was it that really drew you, into that direction?
It, everything. I mean, it was just such a paradigm shift in my entire life. So it was a startup company. The company I had spent the last 5 years at, I was the head programmer for my division at Union Carbide Corporation in Danbury, Connecticut, at the world headquarters. There was 5,000 people in my building, and I've always told people I could have invented the cure to cancer, and no one would have noticed.
Hmm.
And then I go to this company in Detroit, and I am literally working 70, 80 hours a week, doing everything. It was a startup company.
Right,
Really
right.
didn't even want to hire me, but I forced myself on them. And I was building, second stories to the building. I was painting showroom floors. I was coming in Tuesday mornings at 5:30 and dragging 60 bags of garbage to the side of the road because I canceled our garbage service. Uh, I was ordering parts. The secretary quit after 2 months, and I told the owner I can do that too. I type, I can answer phones. So I really, made myself kind of the glue of the company.
Hmm.
And I remember talking to my folks back in New York. My whole family's still back in New York. I call my parents and they'd say, how was your week? Oh my gosh, and keep in mind to get the job there, I had left, as making well over $50,000 a year on the East Coast. To get this job, I was making $7.50 an hour.
Wow,
wanted,
wow.
I wanted into manufacturing. I wanted in on a startup company. So I really burned all my boats on the shore in New York. And I remember telling my parents, for $7.50 an hour, I was working like 80-hour weeks. I remember my mom saying, so when are you coming home? And I said, I'm never coming home. I said, I love this. Like I said, I could have found a cure to cancer and no one would have noticed. And here, everything I do with my two hands makes a difference. And talk about instant gratification. You spend the weekend painting a showroom floor and the company shows up Monday morning and everyone's like, a god.
Wow.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, you see the showroom? And it's like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah. That's
That's
great.
what it was. I mean, just so from a startup perspective, it was just in my veins, so I just loved it. And then from the manufacturing side, I just loved it. I mean, I'm the kid in Carmel, New York, that at 13 and 14, the guys that pulled their hot rods into my driveway, dropped me off boxes of, 8-track players, for anyone who remembers what those are, equalized the speakers, and I'd spend the weekend hooking up these sound systems. I didn't know how I could do it, but I just knew I could do it. And I know it was, I'd get $10, $15, cash money for doing it. So I always had that kind of inclination, and I always loved technology. But all of a sudden, to be around these, $500,000 machines that are making heads, and needless to say, in Detroit back then, especially, was 95 to 98% automotive. So, there's not hardly a part on a car that I haven't worked on, sold a machine for, helped to, figure out a process for. So that was just a blast. Love the technology, love the CNC, the multi-axis machines, the robots, the automation, helping customers how to figure out how to get more competitive in their manufacturing processes. So it was just, I just loved every bit of it.
So that last part that you touched on there, you've explained a lot about the more of the tactical part of the work, the physical building with your two hands, and that you've gotten into quite a bit of the strategy and the leadership side of things as well. Can you talk a little bit about where that came from? How did you learn that type of skill set, and what were some of the strengths that you realized that you had, early on?
Sure. Well, from day one, when I took that job, I was just on a quest for knowledge. Kind of always have been. I've been a voracious reader since I was, in my early teens anyway, and that's never changed over the course of my life. So when I was working in that position, originally when I went out in service, I'd bring a notebook with me. And if we had a 2-hour drive to Jackson, Michigan, God help the service technician I was driving along, because for 2 hours going and then 2 hours coming back, I would just pummel them. I'd read Modern Machine Shop at night and different technical, manuals and books and everything I could get my hands on. And then I would just spend the entire time torturing these guys with questions. What's helical interpolation? What's geometric tolerancing? What's the difference between roundness and cylindricity? On and on. So really, I probably packed about 10 years of learning into about a 2-year service stint. Ended up talking my high school or my sweetheart in New York into marrying me over the phone. So in 1989, Margie came out to Detroit, and just like my parents before me, within 2 years we had 2 kids. So then I went to the owner of the company. I was up to $9 an hour at this point, and I said, hey, I need more money. I got my second kid on the way. And he says, well, if you want more money, you got to go into sales. And a part of me was like, oh no, because most salesmen are not hardworking, ethical folks. And I really enjoyed service. I loved the customers. I loved the service techs I worked with. But at that point, I made the transition. So I threw myself intensely into studying sales. So I wasn't just going to wing it. So in addition to going out there and doing it, I was listening to nonstop Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Hopkins, everything I could get my hands on. I remember The Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy, Brian Tracy. It was like 26 cassettes, and I literally had all 26 memorized. And something I really loved, because I am a student, I'm a lifelong student, listening to these tapes, learning these techniques and skills and organizational and goal setting, and then actually implementing them. And that's the part I loved. I loved, in school, you just learn stuff, and it's so nebulous. Like, I don't know, you're in 8th grade and you're learning about, New Zealand. What do you care? Well, last year I spent a week in New Zealand, and man, if you could really understand back then, your younger self, why this is important and what it means, it changes everything. And for me, that was sales. It was almost like my little, I don't know, experiment. I'm listening to these tapes. I'm absorbing this information in my mind, but then I'd be excited to wake up at 5:30 in the morning and go out into shops and try this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, not being a stupid person, I kept what worked. I got rid of what didn't work. I brought my own creativity to the mix. So for the first bunch of years, I really refined my sales knowledge. And just like when I was in service, I got dog years of knowledge by the intensity I threw at the number of calls that I made. I just dwarfed anyone else in the company when it came to the number of visits that I would make, the number of telephone calls. And of course, you're just compacting, you're compressing. So there's no, replacement for experience. And the more you expose yourself to, the quicker you're going to get that experience.
Yeah.
So by 1995, I had become the top salesman in the company that I was at. And I just thought to myself, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this for somebody else. I'd like to do it for myself. So I went to my wife and I said, I would like to work for myself, but, I'm not going to the bank. We're going to do this with our life savings, and it's going to be hellacious hours. And she said, well, will it be any worse hours than you're already working? And I said, no, same hours. Now we got to do this for another 10 or 15 years. And she said, I'm on board. So we both decided we wanted to raise our family in Cincinnati, Ohio, instead of Detroit, Michigan. So I moved to Cincinnati, started my own company, left my family back for the first year, worked about a year's worth of 80-hour weeks getting my company off the ground. And after the first year, I was at about $5 million in sales, kind of figured out, okay, this isn't rocket science. And I brought my family down. And from that point, I really started studying management, so I everything I could get my hands on in the way of management. My first hire was a full-time consultant who I made the president of my company. So I would stay out all day and sell. And I had him, work on the QuickBooks and teach me how to use that at night after I got done with sales calls and CRM. And he put the structure into the company. And then he taught me after hours, how all of that worked. And I had him for the first 5 years. I've been in business now for 25 years, and I've utilized consultants and advisory boards for all 25 years. So I'm always trying to learn from someone who's been there before, someone who's smarter than me, and there's an awful lot of them out there for me, luckily. And then also, I just have changed the focus of my studies. The first probably 5 years was management, and when I felt like I had a handle on that, there was always organization, time management, goal setting. So that's been a constant theme for the last 35 years. And then especially over the last 15 years, I really switched over to strategic planning, economics, forecasting, and more than anything else, that has really, really served me well.
That's a fantastic story. When you opened up your own company, you mentioned obviously you're making sales calls, you're calling. Was there anything that you can honestly say that really, ramped things up for you? I mean, today a lot of people don't want to necessarily get on the phone and make phone calls. They think that, I'm dealing with one person at a time. Any advice for a new entrepreneur that might just be getting started? How would you say is the best way today to have them, start generating a book of business for themselves?
There's no replacement to hard work. Before the podcast began, you and I were talking a little, and I was saying I can't stand this new normal. I don't want to see it last any longer than it has to. These Zoom meetings have their place, but sales is a contact sport, and there's no replacement for getting flesh to flesh. Best definition I've ever heard in my life of sales is a transference of enthusiasm.
I like it.
You believe in, you learn your products, you know it well, you know how to apply it, and then you just get out there. And if you expose 10,000 people to that, you'll probably end up with 1,000 opportunities, of which you'll probably win 500. If you expose 100 people to it, you might end up with 50 opportunities, of which you might win 10 or 20. Sales is very much a numbers game. There's people out there writing books all the time on how you can just stop making sales, cold calls. They're a thing of the past. You buy my book for $29.99, you're going to make millions without even picking up a phone. It's just horse pucky. A lot of young people who think social media is, they can just get online for 8 hours a day, smashing Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and LinkedIn, and they won't have to do the hard work of sales. And I say that is all horse pucky. There's no replacement. Now, I'm not some dinosaur. I mean, I've got a whole bunch of millennial salesmen working for me, and I teach them quite a bit, and they teach me quite a bit. So, I've got over 10,000 LinkedIn contacts. I mean, I'm pretty well known nationwide for my LinkedIn presence. I'm not a troglodyte, but at the same time, LinkedIn has its place. Advertising has its place. Snail mail has its place.
Hmm.
You know, cold calling, telemarketing, going door to door, you know, referrals, etc. You have to understand each one of these and where they fit in. Sales and having a business like a great big jigsaw puzzle. And there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. And some people have very, you know, strong piece here and they're missing a piece over here. I've spent my career trying to not say, hey, if I'm weak at finance, I'm going to be the greatest at finance. No,
Hmm.
because I mean, I can hire CPAs, you know, for you know, not all that much money to take care of that for me. But I can't find a lot of guys that could do what I could do sales wise. So I've always thought to myself, I'm not going to be an imbalanced man. When I did karate for years, one of the hardest things when you're learning karate, which I started when I was about 11, is we all have a dominant side. You know, I'm righty. And for years, getting that left foot and that left hand and the speed and the strength to try to at least come close to equaling the right side was really hard work. But boy, once you do, you watch UFC and MMA fighting,
Hmm.
if you got a weak side, you're not getting into the octagon because someone's going to figure that out. Well, it's the same way in business. There's a certain core set of values there, things you got to have. You got to know your product. You got to be aggressive. You got to do the numbers. You got to have integrity. You know, you're building a book of business, and unless you're going to sell to the U.S. and screw everybody once,
Hmm.
you better learn how to have a good value proposition. You better learn how to lock customers in for life because that's when life gets really simple. So I'd say to people who are starting out, there is no replacement for numbers. I mean, you really just got to get out there and get yourself into those situations. One of the greatest things that really skyrocketed my business here in Southern Ohio is networking. So when I first came here, I joined every manufacturing association that I knew existed. I went to every monthly meeting. I went across the country, getting my name out there, getting my products out there, interfacing with people, many of whom played the role of mentors or became customers, who just were so nice. But had I not put myself in those positions, I never would have met them and I wouldn't have gotten the opportunities I did. So I really do believe that networking is a critical part in 2020 and beyond, no matter what business you're in, just getting out there. The more you expose yourself and your company to a greater audience, the more opportunities you're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. What types of strategies would you say that you can offer people for networking? How do they get in front of a person in doing it in the right way? What are you teaching your millennials that work for you today?
Well, that's a great question, and that's something I had to learn the hard way. So when I first came to this territory, there was two groups: the Tri-State Tooling and Manufacturing Association down in Cincinnati, and the Dayton Region Manufacturers Association up in Dayton, Ohio.
Hmm.
So I immediately joined both, and I started going to their monthly meetings. When I moved here, my wife and I literally just decided she was from Brooklyn, I was from the Bronx. We didn't want to raise our kids in New York. We fell in love with the family first values of the Midwest, and we just chose Cincinnati as kind of that's the place we'd really like to raise our children. We ended up having six of them, and it was one of the greatest moves we ever made. It's just Cincinnati's such a family friendly, cost of living is good, the people are just superb down here. It's a great place to live.
Hmm.
So when I first came here, I didn't know anybody. And I will tell you, it is just flat out tough, Matt, to walk into a room with 85 people. They are all strangers, and you got to start working your way in.
Hmm.
And some guys are just naturals at that. I'll be frank with you. I was not. I remember coming back from those meetings and telling my wife, I can't stand this. Oh my gosh, these people, they're all like clicky and they've been together forever and they know each other. I'm the outsider and they don't want to let me in.
Hmm.
And Margie would say, well, then, why are you going back? And I'd say, what do you mean? Because I have to. Like, I'm not giving up. Are you kidding? And I told my wife years ago, I said, I'm going to be the president of that association one day. And she
Yeah.
just laughed. Well, I was the chairman of that association probably about 10 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, it just took years of really breaking in. And I'm happy to share some of the things that I learned. Number one is when a bunch of in my industry, manufacturing, when a bunch of tool makers and mold makers have spent a whole day out there in the shop doing that, and at 5:30 at night they show up to a place with an open bar and they grab a beer, they might want to do some shop talk,
Hmm.
but they don't want to be sold to.
Yep.
So I've really learned there's nuances when it comes to networking. There's a place to sell and there's a place not to sell. And you had better front load 90% of that relationship build with that prospect, not around trying to sell him anything, but strictly around trying to get to know him.
Mm-hmm.
What are his hot buttons? What are his likes? What's important to him? What does he do on weekends? How did he get his business started? How many kids does he have? Where did he come up with the name of that business? How did he get funded for it? You really want to find out all about that person. I'm talking probably for months before you ever say something like, hey, I'd love to stop by and talk to you about my product. That's probably going to sound more like, hey, I'd love to stop by and get the nickel tour one day if you are open to that.
Yep.
But you really, and the art of networking is the art of building relationships. It's not the art of selling people stuff. Because if you build a good relationship, Jeffrey Gitomer always says, all things being equal, people will buy from who they like.
Mm-hmm.
And all things being unequal, people will still try to buy from whom they like. Mm-hmm. That's the essence to me of networking right there. You got to build a good relationship, and then down the road, the opportunities will come to do business.
Yeah, sow the seeds today so you can reap the benefits tomorrow. What's next for you? Obviously you've had quite a career, all kinds of different leadership opportunities. You're helping people in robotics, different organizations. What's next for you?
So I'm shifting into that point in my career where, for years I've got mentors and I'd always call them the great white father. And I'm certainly not the great white father yet, but for the past 10 years, there's been a lot of give back in my career. So I work very closely with a lot of the schools, trade schools, apprenticeship programs here locally. I'm very active. I was on the board for the Dayton Region Manufacturers Association for 8 years, past chairman there. I've really spent the last probably 4 or 5 years working very closely with the Tri-State Touring and Manufacturing Association. A lot of the things that we did up in the Dayton region, that we had one of the best associations in the country. I've been working closely with the group down south, and I think we're becoming one of the finest associations in the country down there. I have a real passion for that. It's good for the community, good for manufacturing, and manufacturing is good for the U.S. I'm on an economic forecasting committee out of Washington, D.C. with the Association of Manufacturing Technology. Through some linkage there, I've gotten into the White House to meet with the president and the vice president. So that the things that I'm able to accomplish with these associations, I really feel like they're making a difference that will be felt long after I'm gone. So if I can really help to develop the workforce for the next generation of manufacturers, that's something that I can really get excited about, and that's something I spend a lot of time on. Another thing for me from a personal perspective in business, my life began all over again last year at the tender age of 57, because I started my company 25 years ago this year. And for 24 years, we really built a service company, service first. I have twice as many service people that work for me as do salesmen, and that's strategic on my part. But last year we were approached by the #1 manufacturer of machine tools in the entire world, Mazak, and they asked us to be their exclusive representative in my territory. Yeah, so that has just absolutely blown my company up. We haven't doubled our staff over the past year, but we're pretty close to it.
Wow.
These COVID times right now, we're hiring 3 more people right now. So that has just been fantastic. It has been flat out fun. I'm so re-energized. I mean, Mazak makes a good portion of their product, more than half of what we sell, right in Kentucky. So it's a U.S. made product, which I have a huge passion for. They make over 600 different models of machines. So if I thought I was going to get to coast into retirement easy, not how it's going to work out. So between learning all of the new customers, the equipment, the processes, the people, and I'm just absolutely energized by it. I'm so excited. So the past year here has been the most fun year of my life in business.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so this is just great.
Yeah, no, they always say when you enjoy what you do, you never work a day. So it sounds like you certainly enjoy what you do. So glad you got away from the programming now.
Yeah, no, there's some things, all of it. When I look back, I skipped over some patches, but I mean, I did the marketing and the advertising, and I also did accounting for 2 years. Back when the testing was telling me I had a logical brain, so, I should be stuck in an office all day doing something with figures. So I did accounting for a few years. I did the computer coding and all of it. By the time I moved to Detroit at 25, 26, it just seemed like, wow, that was a big waste. It's so funny, Matt, the way things come around because, as a businessman now running my own company for the last 25 years, marketing, advertising, accounting, computer programming. I
It all
was
comes
the
back.
IT department for my company for the first 15 years. I saved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, installing all of the servers by myself and the software. So it's just amazing how it's like God had a plan, man, and I just had to sit back and wait for it to kick in.
I
And of
love
course,
it.
the old saying is, God helps those who help themselves. So I
Yep.
was waiting for God to do it for me, but it's fortuitous the way the whole thing worked out.
I love it. I love it. Ken, this has been a fantastic conversation. If people want to learn more about you or your company, what would you say is the best way to be able to learn to send them to?
About Greg Knox would probably be on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so they can go there. I've got a company, Knox Machinery LinkedIn, but my personal LinkedIn, I just started using that years ago, and I've got a pretty healthy following on Greg Knox LinkedIn. And then my company website is knoxmachinery.com.
Fantastic. Greg, this has been great. I certainly appreciate the time, and thank you for everything that you're contributing to the Manufacturing Society.
Well, thanks for the time. I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today.
No problem.